There are stories buried so deeply in forgotten archives that even investigators refuse to open them. And then there is Hazelridge. In the winter of 1981, two state troopers forced their way into a farmhouse sealed shut for 43 years. They expected to find two skeletons. Instead, they found two elderly sisters sitting calmly at a kitchen table waiting, as though they'd known the moment help would arrive. But when the troopers asked why the Marsh sisters had locked themselves away since 1938, the answer chilled them to the bone. "We were protecting you." What followed sealed reports, vanished records, whispered warnings remains one of the most disturbing intergenerational mysteries in American folklore. Today, we're opening the door they kept shut for decades. Step carefully. Some stories do not stay quiet once spoken. Before we dive deeper, make sure to like this video so more people discover these forgotten cases. Subscribe if you enjoy cinematic, documentary-style mysteries. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And would you have opened that farmhouse door? Your answers help shape the next stories we cover. The morning of January 14th, 1981, didn't feel like the beginning of anything extraordinary. Troopers Daniel Kovac and James Brennan were simply responding to a welfare check, one of those routine calls that usually ends in paperwork and nothing more. But the moment their cruiser rolled down the narrow dirt road toward the long-forgotten Marsh farmhouse, the world seemed to fall unnaturally still. No birdsong, no wind brushing the trees, just a cold, suspended quiet that felt wrong in a way neither man could explain. The house stood hunched against the winter sky, its paint bleached into a tired gray, and every window on the first floor sealed from within. When they approached the heavy oak door, they discovered something even stranger. It had been nailed shut from the inside, dozens of nails hammered with such force that the wood bowed slightly around each one. This wasn't the work of vandals or squatters. This was deliberate, methodical, almost ritualistic. The sisters who supposedly owned the land hadn't been seen since 1938, and the expectation was grim. Either the house was abandoned, or two forgotten bodies were waiting behind that door. Yet the meter outside was quietly ticking, drawing power as if someone inside still needed light to see. It took the troopers nearly 15 minutes to pry the door open, and when it finally gave way, a heavy, organic smell drifted out, not rot, not decay, but something like damp earth and aging paper. Their flashlights sliced through the darkness, revealing layers of undisturbed dust dancing in the beams like suspended ash. The house felt frozen in another century. Peeling wallpaper, boarded windows, furniture ranged with eerie precision. And then, at the far end of the narrow hall, in the kitchen beneath a single flickering bulb, they saw them two elderly women sitting perfectly still at a wooden table, hands folded, eyes fixed forward as if they'd been waiting for this moment with unsettling patience. Dorothy and Evelyn Marsh. Alive. Alert. And impossibly calm for women who had just been discovered after 43 years of silence. When Kovac asked why they had locked themselves away so completely, the sisters exchanged a glance, one of those silent, heavy looks that carry too much meaning for outsiders to decode. Then Dorothy, the older sister, turned toward him and said in a voice so steady it chilled the officers to their core, "We were protecting you." That moment, the tone, The certainty, the implied threat shifted the encounter from unusual to unforgettable. It was the first crack in a mystery that would soon unravel into sealed files, impossible patterns, and a story the county would spend decades trying to bury. Long before the farmhouse became a sealed relic of dread, the Marsh family was simply one of many old-line households sprinkled across Hazelridge, Pennsylvania, a quiet community where names lingered longer than people did. Dorothy and Evelyn Marsh were known in town as polite, reserved, unmistakably educated daughters of a local mathematics professor. Then, over the winter of 1938, they vanished without explanation. No forwarding address, no farewell letters, not even whispered gossip about where they'd gone. Their disappearance wasn't treated as a mystery so much as an inconvenience. Hazelridge was small, rural, and accustomed to people drifting away during hard years. Then life moved on. The property remained, aging silently at the edge of the woods. And in the decades that followed, the county's relationship with the farmhouse twisted into a strange paradox. Everyone knew of it, but no one ever approached it. Not mail carriers, not tax assessors, not curious teenagers, at least not the ones who stayed long enough to make it a story. What should have been routine checks were quietly avoided, almost subconsciously, as if something about the place nudged human instinct away. The only signs of life came from cold numbers in government ledgers. Property taxes paid automatically, electricity barely sipping from the grid, month after month, year after year. A house that should have been abandoned wasn't. By the late 1970s, the Marsh Sisters existed only on aging paper trails, birth certificates, school records, and a set of property documents nobody had updated in over 40 years. Not a single neighbor reported seeing them. Not a single relative came looking. Hazelridge accepted the void because nothing disrupted it. But when a utility worker in 1981 noticed the inexplicable, steady electrical usage from a house sealed so tightly the doors and windows appeared fused to their frames, it shook loose decades of collective neglect. The county sheriff ordered a welfare check, not out of suspicion, but routine obligation. That simple decision ripped open the airtight illusion that the Marsh family's story was finished. What the troopers found inside, that Dorothy and Evelyn had been there all along. Living in absolute isolation forced everyone to confront an unsettling truth. These women didn't disappear from the world by accident. They removed themselves with purpose. Their absence wasn't a mystery. It was a warning no one knew how to read. And when authorities later realized the sisters had maintained immaculate secrecy, no purchases, no contact, no footprints of any kind, it became clear that Hazelridge had not forgotten them. The Marsh sisters had ensured the world forgot them. Long before the sisters sealed themselves away, their father, Professor Martin Marsh, had become consumed by a question most academics would have dismissed as superstition. Why did the youngest daughters in his family keep dying at the age of 33? As a mathematics professor at Hazelridge College, he approached the problem with the same precision he brought to his research, charting dates, mapping bloodlines, searching for variables that repeated with unnerving consistency. When the pattern emerged, it didn't resemble folklore or coincidence. It resembled a sequence, clean, cyclical, and horrifyingly exact, beginning in 1762. Every third generation lost its youngest daughter on the same date, December 16th, always without violence, always without warning. Marsh called his study generational recursion. The idea that certain outcomes, neither genetic nor environmental, could pass through lineage, like a repeating equation. According to those who later saw pieces of his notes, he didn't believe the family was cursed. He believed they were caught in the path of something predictable, something that waited. And when he confirmed the next projected death, his own daughter Evelyn, in 1960, his work shifted from curious research into a desperate race against a force he could measure but not understand. The more Marsh investigated, the deeper the pattern rooted itself into verifiable history. Death certificates aligned with exact 70-year intervals. Church registries confirmed ages. Newspaper obituaries filled in the gaps. Every piece of evidence reinforced what he feared most. This wasn't mythology, and it wasn't madness. It was documented reality hiding in plain sight. Marsh abandoned traditional academic channels and began searching for anomalies, for loopholes, for any thread that could unravel the cycle. But the closer he came, the more the work consumed him. He withdrew from colleagues. His lectures grew sporadic. Even family members noticed a haunted edge creeping into his personality, as though he felt something approaching long before anyone else sensed danger. According to Dorothy and Evelyn's later accounts, their father's final months were marked by frantic, sleepless nights spent poring over family records and cryptic formulas no one else could decipher. And in the end, Martin Marsh reportedly reached one chilling conclusion. The pattern wasn't tied to fate or biology, it was tied to visibility. To escape it, one would have to vanish, not spiritually, but socially, to cease existing in the world's eyes. That realization would shape the daughters' necks for decades and force them into a decision so extreme that even the investigators who uncovered it struggled to believe it was made by sane minds until the evidence proved otherwise. When investigators later reviewed the Marsh family records, what struck them wasn't the tragedy, it was the precision. Every name, every date, every death aligned with the kind of mathematical certainty that made coincidence feel impossible. Beginning in 1762 and unfolding like clockwork every 33 years. The youngest daughter of each generation died on December 16th. No accidents, no epidemics, no external causes that could be traced to a shared event. The coroner reports from the 1800s described unexplained cessation of breath, while later records, now stored on brittle paper in county archives, labeled the deaths as sudden heart stoppage. All different phrasing for the same outcome. Young women who were healthy one day and gone the next. Professor Marsh had verified these details obsessively, pulling birth and death certificates from distant counties, church ledgers, even newspaper obituaries that had yellowed with age. And every piece of paper whispered the same chilling truth. This was a lineage marked by a pattern so unwavering that even skeptics had trouble explaining it away. What made the pattern more disturbing was its refusal to break. Even when circumstances around the deaths shifted, the women came from different towns, different social circles, and different eras where medical understanding evolved dramatically, but the cause never changed. In 1927, for example, the youngest Marsh daughter of that generation was found lifeless in her bed with no signs of trauma, just as her ancestor had been 165 years earlier. Investigators reviewing these cases decades later weren't looking for supernatural explanations. They were trained to search for human ones. Yet the consistency defied every natural variable. How did a pattern stretch across wars, migrations, pandemics, and shifting family branches without ever missing its mark? This was the question Professor Marsh had been trying to answer when his research took its darkest turn, because embedded in those death certificates was a second truth, one more terrifying than the first. There were no survivors. Every cycle ended the same way, with flawless, almost mechanical precision. And when the next cycle, 1960, approached, the Marsh sisters understood what the records made clear. If nothing changed, Evelyn Marsh would not live to see her 34th birthday. That realization didn't just alter their lives. It ended them, at least in the eyes of the world. By the time the calendar inched toward December 1960, the Marsh sisters were living under the weight of a deadline no human should ever have to measure their life against. According to every historical record their father had uncovered, Evelyn, born in 1909, and the youngest daughter of her generation, was marked to die at age 33 on December 16, 1960. It didn't matter that she would have been 51 by then, far beyond the fatal age associated with the cycle. The pattern, as documented from 1760 to onward, cared nothing for logic or chronology. It cared only about position in the bloodline. And in the Marsh family tree, Evelyn still held the title of youngest daughter, even decades past the age when the pattern traditionally struck. As that year approached, Professor Marsh's desperation evolved into something colder, sharper. He became convinced that survival hinged not on outsmarting the pattern, but on disappearing from it, removing Evelyn from every social, civic, and legal system that made her traceable. It was this belief that drove him to propose a solution so radical the sisters later described it as both their prison and their salvation: complete removal from the world. Not metaphorically, literally, the sisters would erase themselves. In December 1938, 2 years after their father died and 22 years before the predicted death date, Dorothy and Evelyn carried out his plan. They sealed the farmhouse not as an act of fear, but as a calculated survival strategy. Windows were boarded from the inside. Doors were nailed shut in overlapping layers. The cellar was poured over with concrete. They stockpiled preserved foods, paid every bill automatically, and eliminated any need for outside contact. According to their later statements, this was not merely isolation, it was an attempt to become invisible to the pattern. Their reasoning was as unsettling as it was precise. If the pattern required a participant to exist within the world's observable structure, then stepping fully outside that structure could break its reach. When December 16, 1960 arrived, Evelyn waited in absolute silence inside that sealed house, listening for a fate that had claimed every youngest Marsh daughter before her. But the day passed, and the next, and the next. For the first time in over 2 centuries, the cycle had missed its mark. Evelyn was alive, yet instead of emerging from their confinement victorious, the sisters stayed sealed in place for another 20 years. Because 3 months after the cycle passed, something began knocking at the door, slow, precise, deliberate. A reminder, perhaps, that escaping the date did not mean escaping whatever had been following their bloodline. From the outside, people imagined the Marsh farmhouse as a place of quiet decay, a structure frozen in time, slowly collapsing into the woods around it. But inside, Dorothy and Evelyn lived with a discipline that bordered on devotional. For 43 years, the sisters maintained a world that never changed, a small rotation of preserved foods, meticulously rationed, stacks of books read by candlelight to save electricity, journals filled with steady, deliberate handwriting. They created a daily routine so precise that even investigators later commented it resembled the structure of a long-term scientific observation rather than an act of survival. One sister always remained awake while the other slept. They tracked dates by sound, temperature, and the faintest cues from outside rainfall patterns on the roof. The shifting creaks of the house in winter. They never opened the door, never peeled away a board, never once broke the self-imposed barrier that separated them from the world. Their isolation was not madness, it was method. Their movements were deliberate, their choices logical. Every day of their confinement was shaped by the knowledge that invisibility wasn't a choice, it was protection. Despite the claustrophobic conditions, the sisters showed no signs of deteriorating mentally, something that astonished doctors after their eventual removal. Instead, their internal world had become a fortress of routine, a rhythm that allowed them to endure decades of darkness without slipping into confusion or despair. They documented everything: inventory, sleeping shifts, weather changes they could only hear, not see, and most hauntingly, they documented the pattern's behavior beyond the house. Dorothy recorded every December 16th with clinical precision, noting whether the knocking came, how many knocks, how long the intervals lasted, and when the vibrations grew strong enough to shake dishes in the cupboards. The journal entries paint the picture of women not trying to escape their fate, but studying it, containing it almost as though they believed the farmhouse itself was acting as a barrier, holding something outside that had already taken so much from their bloodline. When rescuers finally opened the door in 1981, the sisters didn't celebrate. Evelyn wept as they crossed the threshold. Dorothy warned that they had let it out, and when authorities saw the state of the house, clean, orderly, maintained even under crushing isolation, it became chillingly clear that the Marsh sisters had not gone mad in the dark. They had survived in it with purpose. For the first 22 years of their confinement, silence was the sisters' only companion, an oppressive, unbroken quiet that made the darkness behind those boarded windows feel almost timeless. But everything changed 3 months after December 16, 1960. That night, sometime between 2 and 4 a.m., Dorothy and Evelyn heard it. 5 knocks on the front door, each spaced exactly 10 seconds apart. Not frantic, not hesitant, measured, like something was following a rhythm it had rehearsed for centuries. The sisters froze, neither daring to breathe, convinced that the pattern they had escaped was now searching for them in a form they could finally sense. They didn't answer, they didn't move, but the knocking returned the following year, and the year after that, always on December 16th, always in the same sequence. Dorothy began documenting every occurrence in her journal notes, written with the calm precision of a scientist observing an experiment. She described how the knocks grew firmer by the mid-1960s, forceful enough by 1970 to rattle the frame. By 1980, the vibrations trembled up through the floorboards, shaking the house as if something massive stood on the other side of the wall. The most disturbing phase began in the late 1970s, when the knocking no longer confined itself to the door. On December 16, 1978, Dorothy recorded that it came from every window at once, 5 knocks in perfect unison, each 10 seconds apart, echoing around the house like something circling the structure methodically. Searching for a weakness, the sisters stayed awake through every cycle, listening as the relentless pattern tested the walls they had built. By 1980, Dorothy wrote an entry that investigators later described as the single most unsettling line in the entire journal. It spoke our names. What that meant, whether they heard whispers, echoes, or something they could not fully explain, remains sealed in the county's restricted files. But when the troopers opened the farmhouse on that freezing morning in 1981, Dorothy did not greet them with relief. Instead, she warned them that by breaking the seal, they had undone decades of containment. "You've let it out," she told Officer Kovac, her voice cold with certainty. "It knows there's a next generation." Whether the knocking was something supernatural, psychological, or rooted in a phenomenon no one could name, the sisters believed it would follow their bloodline wherever it could find them. And tragically, they were right. When troopers Kovac and Brennan pried the first nails from the farmhouse door in 1981, they believed they were performing a simple welfare check. They had no concept of the boundary they were crossing, one carefully maintained by the Marsh Sisters for decades. The moment the door cracked open, a rush of stale, preserved air slid past them, carrying hints of earth, candle soot, and something faintly chemical. It was not the smell of abandonment. It was the smell of containment. Inside, the house looked less like a derelict structure and more like a perfectly preserved capsule, maintained with almost obsessive order. The sisters, seated at the kitchen table under a single hanging bulb, showed no panic, no relief, no surprise. They looked at the officers with the composure of people who had rehearsed this moment endlessly, knowing it would arrive but praying it never would. When asked why they had stayed hidden since 1938, Dorothy answered with chilling calm, "We were protecting you." What followed in that kitchen during the next hour, documented in an 11-page report, sealed within 72 hours, shook both troopers to their core. Dorothy and Evelyn explained the generational pattern, the predicted deaths, the knocking, and the belief that their confinement had held something at bay. Kovac, normally unflappable, later noted in his personal writings that the sisters spoke with a clarity that made disbelief feel irrational. Removing the sisters from the property was not a rescue, it was a violation of the system they believed was keeping the world safe. Dorothy pleaded to stay, insisting that breaching the house's seal gave the pattern permission to search for its next target. When the ambulance arrived and the sisters were escorted outside, Evelyn wept silently, her steps trembling as she crossed the threshold for the first time since Roosevelt was president. Dorothy remained stern, almost angry, and before being placed inside the vehicle, she turned to Kovac and delivered a final warning. "It'll find the next generation faster now." That statement, dismissed as delusion by some, feared by others, was included only in Kovacs' private notes, not in the official documentation. After their removal, doctors found the sisters physically healthy and mentally sound, which only deepened the mystery. These were not women suffering from shared psychosis. They were lucid, coherent, and unwaveringly certain about what they believed. The county sealed the detailed report almost immediately, with a judge ordering that its contents remain unread for the sake of public welfare. Even other officers weren't allowed access. The house was boarded, marked for demolition, and treated like a crime scene no one understood. But none of those bureaucratic measures could undo what had already been set in motion. The seal had been broken, and whatever the Marsh sisters believed they were holding back, whatever had knocked on their doors for decades, was now free to search elsewhere. For more than 2 centuries, the pattern had never deviated, never missed a cycle, never chosen the wrong daughter, never struck outside its strict numerical boundaries. But when the Marsh sisters were removed from the farmhouse in 1981, something shifted. According to their warning, the pattern required proximity, visibility, a target situated clearly within the world. And now that they had been forced back into society, the next branch of the bloodline became newly exposed. Thomas Marsh, their nephew, inherited the remnants of the family's records, journals, research notes, and generations of documentation, but out of fear for his own children, he burned everything. What he didn't know was that the cycle was coming again. The next predicted date was December 16, 1993. His younger daughter, Rebecca, born in 1971, was only 22, far too young to match the historical age of death in the pattern's sequence. By all logic, she shouldn't have been in danger. But logic had never been the driving force behind the phenomenon that haunted their bloodline. In the early hours of December 16, 1993, Rebecca's roommate found her standing motionless in their Pittsburgh apartment kitchen, staring at the front door as if listening to something just beyond it. When asked what she was doing, Rebecca replied in a voice described as not quite her own, "Someone's knocking. Can't you hear it?" Yet the room was silent. After that night, Rebecca began to unravel with alarming speed. She stopped sleeping, then stopped eating, then retreated into long, unbroken periods of silence. Doctors called it a psychiatric collapse, stress-induced, perhaps, or the result of an undiagnosed condition, but her symptoms didn't follow any recognizable pattern. She sat for hours facing doors or windows, unmoving, her eyes tracking something no one else could see. 6 weeks after the incident, on January 28, 1994, Rebecca Marsh's heart simply stopped. She was only 23, not 33, a year too young, a decade too early, entirely outside the rules the pattern had followed for generations. Her final coherent words, whispered to a nurse the day before she died, were documented but never explained. "It found me anyway. You can't hide from your blood." The official cause of death was listed as suicide, but the Marsh family knew better, and investigators who had once read the sealed 1981 report could not ignore the timing. The cycle had not missed its mark. It had adapted. It no longer cared about age. It no longer cared about generational spacing. The pattern had evolved the moment the seal was broken. And with Rebecca's death, The Marsh bloodline effectively ended save for one surviving descendant, Sarah, who changed her name, moved across the country, and refused to speak to anyone about her family again. Whatever had haunted the Marsh women for over 200 years had taken its final documented victim. But the most unsettling question remains. If the pattern could break its own rules once, what prevents it from doing so again? After the Marsh sisters were released into the world again, Hazelridge tried desperately to move past the story. Officials boarded the farmhouse, declared it unsafe, and quietly scheduled it for demolition. In 2003, the structure finally came down, reduced to splintered beams and fractured concrete, as if erasing the building could erase the fear attached to it. Yet the land remains empty, undeveloped, and persistently avoided. Contractors cite soil instability and permit issues, though county records show no such problems. Meanwhile, the sealed 1981 files, especially the 11-page transcript taken inside the kitchen, have been requested under public transparency laws for separate times. Each request was denied with identical language to protect the privacy of surviving family members. But there are no surviving family members. Rebecca died in 1994, Thomas in 2008. Their older daughter Sarah living quietly under a different name far from Pennsylvania. So if the files remain sealed to protect people who statistically no longer exist, what truth inside them is still considered dangerous? Even the judge who originally ordered their suppression reportedly closed the folder, looked at the prosecutor, and said, "No one else reads this. We bury it." And then he never spoke of the case again. The last voices connected to Hazelridge faded slowly. Trooper Brennan confessed to his daughter shortly before his death that he'd returned to the property alone in 1982, unable to silence the feeling that something had been left behind. He never entered the house, just stood in the yard at dusk, staring at the boarded windows. As darkness settled, he heard it. 5 knocks from inside, each spaced 10 seconds apart, echoing through a home no one had entered in a year. He left immediately and never returned, later telling his daughter, "Something was in that house with them, and it's still looking." Whether the pattern was supernatural, psychological, or rooted in some unexplained phenomenon is a question no official agency has attempted to answer. But the facts remain in plain sight. Generations of youngest Marsh daughters dying on the same date. 2 sisters who vanished to buy one of them time. Decades of knocking documented with scientific accuracy. And a final death in 1994 that broke every established rule. The pattern changed once. Nothing says it won't change again. And if it truly hunts visibility names, records, attention, then one unsettling question lingers at the edge of this story. Does telling it give the pattern something new to find? Maybe Hazelridge was right. Maybe some secrets should stay buried. But then again, maybe the only thing more dangerous than knowing is not knowing what might be waiting in your own bloodline, counting the years, preparing to knock.